Coming up next on Words and Numbers, Scott Bessent's at it again.
The best in quiet quitting.
American Airlines.
Do you have to do that?
Yes, I do.
And AI and human dignity.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
So, Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week? Besides being offended yet again.
I ran across this beautiful article that you're going to love. The hero of this article is Joaquin Garcia, building supervisor for local government in Spain. He's working for 20 years. At some point, his job becomes too stressful. He talks about workplace bullying, and so he stops showing up. He just stops going to work. No resignation, no meetings with HR. He just doesn't show up.
How many years did they continue to pay him?
Oh, here we go. His annual salary, $41,500, kept landing in his account like clockwork. And the reason for 20 years that nobody noticed was that his position was overseen by two separate departments, each of which thought the other one was responsible for him.
This is the perfect job.
Do you know how they discovered him?
Probably with his obituary, would be my guess.
Oh, no, even better. He was nominated for a long service award.
Well, in fairness, he did serve for a long time.
Right, they go looking for him to give him the award. No one can find the guy.
You know, every week I tell the nice people out there listening that I'm available and you should hire me. But now I want to say I'm available for a no-show job every day of the week. If you have one of those that you want to hire for, I'm your boy. You get in touch with me.
Well, you know, I was reading an article just recently that claimed, and I have no idea how they measure these things, but it claimed that anywhere from 40 to 60% of people in white-collar jobs really aren't doing anything.
Yeah, I believe it. They're just showing up, mostly.
Yeah. Oh, and before we pass it off to you, I want to mention something. One of our listeners sends us swag from time to time from his shop, Bull Snot.
I wore my Bull Snot t-shirt the other day. I was wearing
Bull
it around
Snot's great.
town.
He contacted us and said, you know, we've got this stuff. I want to send you some things. I figured, okay, he's going to send me a hat or something. I get like 2 huge boxes with
and they were
Bull
very
Snot
heavy
products.
They were very heavy.
Yeah. And it was, it's all car cleaning stuff. So, you know, the wax and the tire cleaning, all this stuff. And of course, my son, who is of the age that he's into these sorts of things, he grabs the whole thing. He's gone doing his car, right? I mention it because, you know, they're car cleaning products. But recently, I had the problem of having to clean our exterior windows that in the house. Hadn't been cleaned in years, and you're trying everything. Nothing is working, right? The whole thing, the Windex, we tried the vinegar and the something solution and blah, 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 all this stuff, nothing. And my wife says, hey, what about that Bull Snot? This is not an advertisement. This is true testimonial.
That's right. This is a true testimonial, not an advertisement.
I get the stuff out and spray it on the thing and wipe it and done. 20, 30 years of grime, gone completely. It never would have occurred to me because it's marketed as a car care product, but works great on exterior house windows.
Go buy your Bull Snot. Right. The t-shirts are really cool too. I wear my t-shirt. I have a cycle of t-shirts, and I wear my Bull Snot t-shirt literally once a week. So it'll be dead and buried before long because, you know, once a week is a lot of wearing, but I do love it. Anyway, we talked about Scott Bessent, and I'm on record as believing that Scott Bessent might be
Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah, I was looking more for the word retarded. I'm wondering if I'm allowed to say that again or whatever. But
we'll find out when you get bleeped or not bleeped.
But look, retarded literally means slow. but you're going to get there sooner or later, right? It doesn't imply that you're going to be an idiot the rest of your life. And I once worked at the Connecticut Department of Mental Retardation, so it was not always seen as a bad word. I worked at the Hartford Association of Retarded Citizens, which was a group run by or founded by the parents of developmentally delayed people. So, this word has undergone a massive shift.
Well, yeah, and well, for example, my sister was, she's dead now. She was severely mentally retarded, and growing up, that was what you said, and I said that. This was years later, so I must have been out of graduate school at the time, and somebody was asking me about my family, and I said, "Oh yes, and my sister, she's dead now, but she was severely mentally retarded." And you would think I would have slapped the guy. He says, "You can't say that." I hadn't used the word in like 30 years. I didn't know that it went from acceptable to unacceptable.
Yeah, and I'm using it in the unacceptable way here because I think Scott Bessent's just a retard. Anyway, what he is, you might recall that he messed about in the bond market a week or two ago when we talked about it, and it had exactly the opposite effect that was intended.
Right.
So here he comes now with a brand new idea. And I want to get your unfiltered opinion of this, and I'm trying to decide which portion of this article from CNBC I should read aloud to you. Let's just go with the headline. Bessent could tap nearly $1 trillion from the, and I'm adding some words here, from the Treasury general account to fund bond buybacks, sources said. So there's a couple of revelations here. There is this thing, the Treasury general account, and under Biden, it had like between 300 and 600 billion in it.
Right.
And right now, it's got apparently about $950 billion in it.
Yes.
And Bessent wants to use this to buy back a ton of high interest bonds and pay for them with short period bonds.
Right.
And this will be the mechanism. Now, I, as every non-expert American is probably thinking right now, if we have $950 billion in the bank for these people to screw around in the bond market, why do we not have a $39 trillion debt?
Yeah. Okay. So that account that you mentioned is it's analogous. Well, it's basically the government's checking account.
It's the checking account,
and so it needs the money for ongoing expenses. However, having said that, it is currently about twice the size that it needs to be, or twice the size that historically it has been.
Twice its traditional size.
Right. Now, how it got there and what the ramifications are, I don't know. But nonetheless, it's twice the size. Here's the thing that bothers me. The Federal Reserve, which is charged with monetary policy, we use the phrase government, but it's technically not government. It's built to be separate, insulated as much as possible from political considerations. The members of the Board of Governors have 12-year terms. And the reason they have 12-year terms is so that they can outlive whatever presidents show up. But the Fed, in conducting monetary policy, we've done everything we can to keep the politics out of it, because sometimes the Fed needs to do things that are the right thing to do, but unpopular.
Like keeping interest rates high right now.
Well, yeah, and Bessent has decided that he's going to use this $900 billion and conduct his own monetary policy. He's deliberately intervening in an attempt to drive down long interest rates and drive up short interest rates. And people might say, well, wait a minute, he's buying back bonds, so doesn't that reduce our debt? No. He's buying back the bonds and then borrowing money on short-term bonds to pay for the long-term bonds he's buying back. So basically, all he's doing the same thing you would do if you had a 30-year mortgage and decided you're going to switch it to a variable rate mortgage.
That's exactly right.
Everything's great as long as variable rates are below that fixed. As soon as they rise above, you're wishing you hadn't done that.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing that he should have taken a lesson last week when he did what he did, and the exact opposite thing that he wanted to happen happened. Right? Because that could happen. But what's likely to happen here is that this is just going to become a gimmick that pushes off a problem that's baked into the economics for a very short period of time. And the minute he's blown through the $950 billion, and he'll blow through it, we're right back where we started.
Oh, yeah. And, someone might say, well, but there'll be fewer long-term bonds and blah, blah. Look, he has directed Treasury to purchase at least $4 billion per round of long-term bonds. And these rounds come up once every 5 days or so. Okay. And you say, well, that's a lot, $4 billion. No, there's $5.5 trillion of long-term bonds out there. He would have to do this $4 billion every 5 days for 15 years to reduce that $5.5 trillion to zero. He's a drop in the bucket. The larger problem here is not the economics. It's the politics. And you talked about a couple of episodes ago, the federal government owning stock in corporations. Mm-hmm. You want an example of how things can go badly with that? Here it is. And we're only talking about the bond market, and not even the bond market in general. We're talking about treasuries. If politicians had free rein to mess with financial markets, that's basically the end of financial markets in the United States.
Yep. And oddly, this was not the foolishness of the week. I say that almost every week lately because everything's so damn foolish. For the foolishness of the week, we return, oddly enough. Wes Westmoreland has a slight, there's a dark horse candidate with connoisseur of the foolishness, and it's our good friend and friend of the podcast, David Shane, who I don't think I've ever met in 3 dimensions, but sure would like to. He sends me a lot of foolishness, and all he had to do was say, your favorite airline is at it again, and he sent me a link. And don't you know, not only is it my favorite airline, not only is it in August, literally this month, it's in Phoenix, right around the corner from my house. Phoenix, about 2 hours from where I live. I will read to you from my screen for a brief moment. An alert air traffic controller at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport prevented a mid-air collision this month after 2 American Airlines Boeing 737 jets accidentally operated under the identical flight number at the same time.
Yeah, I saw that. That's amazing.
Did you think immediately that I had to be on one of those 2 flights? That there was no way in hell I wasn't on one of those 2 flights?
That was astounding. It was just astounding. And if I read it correctly, it had something to do with one of the flights was delayed so long that which is American Airlines, but delayed so long that it was into the next day, and whatever it was about that caused them to happen to have duplicate flight numbers.
You have it exactly right, which means there were failures up and down the line. How many American Airlines employees had to be utterly incompetent for this to happen? Why isn't the American Airlines CEO going on TV saying, I just fired everyone? No. This is business as usual for American Airlines. And we're going to keep pointing it out forever because they have delayed or canceled me 14 times in a row. They should have gotten me on time to a place I was going by accident at least once.
I was thinking about you because I'm going to be in North Carolina in a couple of months.
Oh
And
God, don't
had
do
a-
it.
I had a
Don't do it.
I had a United ticket that connected through Chicago, and it would get in at like 1:00 in the morning, and I really need to be here earlier. And there was an American Airlines flight that would get me here like 9 hours sooner, and it was direct.
Allegedly.
Well, yeah, I guess it's possible it will actually get me here later.
I wish you well. I will never fly American Airlines again. Never in my life is it going to happen. I've got the application for the Delta credit card right out on the kitchen counter, and Delta it is from here on out. They're the best in the business. Why am I bothering with American? American flies like 30 flights a day or whatever it is out of Tucson. Delta only a small handful, but they always get where they're going.
Right, yeah.
So the hell with it. And, Americans going to lose a lot of cash as a result because I fly a lot. But imagine what they're going to lose on that 3.5% they could have made on every single thing I buy every day. Because the American credit card is getting torn up too.
And let's remind our listeners, we put a call out on Words and Numbers Backstage for, and you put it on Twitter. For
I did. I
any
have asked
American Airlines employee to come on and talk about it. We'll give them a fair shake.
I want a vice president at least.
Mm-hmm.
I want somebody with some answers, because every day on X, all I see are people stranded by American Airlines, and American Airlines has this canned response. This is not the experience we wanted you to have. Well, why do you keep making people have that experience then?
Your behavior says otherwise.
I mean, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But what can you do, American Airlines?
This week, James Martin joins us. James Martin is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large for America Magazine, and author of many books, among them the New York Times bestseller, Work in Progress, Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest. Father Jim, welcome to Words and Numbers.
My pleasure.
Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
I was so excited when you accepted our invitation to join us. I'm a big fan of your work.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be with you.
I have to tell you, Anthony's been talking about having you on for the past 2 years.
Okay, well, I'm happy to make whatever.
So this is a momentous occasion.
Oh, that's
Right.
nice. Happy to help.
Well, we were just looking for an excuse, and Pope Leo gave us one with his encyclical, Magnificat Humanitas. And, of course, he talks about AI. And James and I, in the past, have taken issue with popes talking about the economy. And so when it comes out that Pope Leo is going to talk about AI, I thought, oh, my God, it's more of this. And when I read what he wrote, actually, I was quite impressed. I got the sense that he was approaching this question less from a technological perspective than from a human perspective. I mean, I still have some things I want to talk about, but I was pleasantly surprised in reading it. So let's just jump in with my question. Pope Leo talks about AI, and he says something that I have an immediate reaction to whenever anybody says it, which is this technology is different. And I have this reaction because people have said this about every technology that's come along, going back to the printing press. And I'm not sure it is, but I could be convinced that human reaction to it may be different.
Yeah, I would say that's a really interesting point. I thought you were going to say, since every invention since the wheel, which is probably also accurate. The Pope is seeing a unique set of challenges with AI that we haven't seen with other, shall we say, technological changes. So, for example, I don't think anyone thought that railroads are going to, wipe out the human race or kill us, right? Which there are some people who say that about AI. I think what's important to note, a little bit of context. So, the long tradition of Catholic social teaching, which is, commenting on, a just society and looking for social justice, started in earnest in the modern age with Leo XIII. And he wrote an encyclical, which is a letter to the whole church, called Rerum Novarum, on new things. And it was basically about what? the Industrial Revolution. And it was very interesting that Pope Leo XIV, the former Cardinal Robert Prevost, took Leo as his name. And a lot of people thought just what, you were thinking, which is that, it's a kind of nod to not only the long tradition of Catholic social teaching, but Leo XIII himself, and also this Rerum Novarum. So almost as soon as he took office, Pope Leo XIV, the new one, started to talk about AI. And I think it was, I was really surprised because one of the things I thought, and maybe both of you guys thought, was, my gosh, this is going to be out of date as soon as he, hits send, right? But as you point out, he is looking at it as something new and looking at it primarily from a spiritual point of view. That's the great contribution, I think, of this encyclical. So I just wanted to frame it a little bit before we kind of moved on.
Well, James and I have talked about AI on several episodes over the past 6 months, and James raised an issue along the lines of this conversation. He said, but what happens when we pair AI with robots? And both of those technologies are, within just a few years of being put together. And it occurred to me, oh my God, now we've got a serious human problem. When you can buy off the shelf something that looks and feels and acts and talks and interacts just like a human being, but isn't.
Well, I just saw an article today in the Times about robots. I think they're all over Japan. I seem to be in Japan all the time, these stories, that are going through supermarkets and are able to, they look like humans, more or less, and able to pick things off the shelves and whatnot. And then robots that I saw in China that I think can run. Now, I think for me, the scarier thing is what happens if some, I don't know, malefactor decides that he's going to create some robot that's going to rob your house, or beat you up or something, and you're powerless against this. And to your point, what happens when that is married to AI, right? Where, who knows what's going to be fed into the robot's brain? So I think there is this kind of possibility for this dystopian nightmare that, to your earlier point, that I think people couldn't see, when it came to like the steam engine and things like that. And maybe they did think the end of the world was going to happen because of the steam engine, but it really does seem pretty frightening when I read stuff. And I think one of the great insights of Magnificat Humanitas is that the people who are deciding this should not be just a select group of, industry tycoons. I mean, it can't just be, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and, fill in the blank. It can't be, because it affects all of society. So that was another great contribution from Pope Leo about this.
I mean, there's something here too, right? Because you just described, as I often do, the George Orwell version of what we're broadly considering today. But there's the Aldous Huxley version too, right? The softer, maybe much, much worse version, where lonely people don't seek out other human beings anymore. They just go buy a robot.
Mm-hmm.
Because it talks like a person and it looks like a person. So, hey, why not? And I think we're at I think both visions of both negative visions are eminently plausible.
Well,
but
we see
boy, we're at a turning point.
We are, and I think we see it already. I mean, you read stories about people who feel more comfortable with their chatbots and therapists who are chatbots. I saw an interesting article in the Times, the New York Times, about a pastor who was so burdened by his congregation. I mean, in terms of time constraints and things like that, that he set up basically like a chatbot where people would text him and it would kind of give them responses as if it were him. And that's a problem. And, at the center of Magnificat Humanitas is human dignity, right? I think the other real danger is that, a third danger would be to say that, we don't need, humans anymore who are weak or sick or ill, because we have robots that can do everything. So it is a kind of focus on what's called this transhumanism. We're gonna sort of overcome humanity and illness and weakness. Well, that's basically saying that illness and weakness are bad things, and that, being human and being flawed and being imperfect and having a body is a bad thing. That's a dangerous thing to start introducing into people's consciousness, because eventually you say, well, if you're not as productive as a robot, why do we need you? So that's another concern of the Holy Father.
There's a quote about halfway through the document that struck me, and this is a kind of thing that Francis has said before and raised my hackles, but here it is. Leo says, it's no longer possible to rely solely on the invisible hand of markets. Politics has a task of orienting economies and technology to the common good. And I was hoping you could speak to that in a little bit, because what bothers me as an economist is this kind of thing, and you see it in earlier encyclicals, this kind of thing speaks as if markets are this inhuman object that needs to be controlled, and it's speaking to the humans who are the political class. Whereas an economist, I would argue, if anything, the reverse, that the markets are the sum total of the humans. The political class is a subset that's actually often not interested in the common good, but in advancing their own ends. Before I go further, I'll let you comment on that.
I am happy to talk about this. I don't know if you know this. I'm happy to say I'm a graduate of the Wharton School of Business. I got my BS in economics, and I studied finance, and I worked in finance for 6 years with General Electric. So I'm happy to talk with you about that as a former econ person and finance major and all that. I would say this, the Catholic Church's position on this has always been that, I'll basically put it this way, that let me give you my point of view. My point of view is this: I think capitalism is the most efficient distributor of goods and services that we have, that it is. So I'm a capitalist, right? That I just want to state that out front, right? And I believe in general in the invisible hand and the markets and whatnot, and free market economies. However, the point of the Catholic Church is that they're not perfect, right? And all we have to do is look around, and I can walk out in the street in New York and see homeless people and, people having $300 meals, lunches across the street, literally from me. And so it does deserve some attention to the people whom the market fails. That's the idea. And this is why the tradition of Catholic social teaching is always looking at, people who need to be kept by the safety net and the common good. And one of the great insights is that, now again, I'm speaking as a Wharton grad, that profits and profitability for corporations and even for a country is not the only measure of success, right? It is, how does it contribute to the common good, right? So if you have sort of untrammeled free markets where some people can be wealthy and other people can't, like tough, I mean, that's just the way the market works. That is not a good, right? It needs to be sort of ordered towards the common good. So I would say this: I think in general, what they're saying is that markets need to be regulated, right, in order that people can have certain basic needs met. So that's the idea. And again, it is this sort of foregrounding of, that is a very simplistic way of expressing kind of Catholic social teaching, but it's a foregrounding of human dignity. And to say that there are some people whom the market has, all we have to do is look around, has failed. And how do we care for those people? And what does that mean? And, are the people who regulate the markets, those actors that you're talking about, are they skewing it towards the rich? That's the other thing. Are they creating loopholes for the rich and tax dodges and things like that, such that people who are poor are not going to, be able to participate in the common good? So I would say it is not a condemnation of capitalism or the invisible hand. It's a corrective, and I do think it needs a corrective. That's how I see it.
And I'll speak to our listeners right now, probably 20% or more of whom are losing their minds.
That's right, at turning us off, right.
And
I'm kind of losing my mind over here.
Well,
right.
but hang on. I think at its root, much of what you said, possibly all of what you said, I could frame under the heading, the language we would use is enforcement of property rights, where property rights is very well defined. And that covers so much of, maybe not 100%, but it covers so much of what you're talking about. So you talk about, for example, the political class being co-opted by the rich and managing things for their own devices, yeah, that's a clear violation of property rights from our perspective. The thing that breaks my heart every time I run across it for the church is when I hear read something like this, and what I hear is the statement that the church is calling on the political class to do the following, which to me, and the reason it breaks my heart is it sounds like the church abrogating its role to the political class, when it should be the church who's calling for that and speaking to the people who, and when you say the people, I picture markets.
Well, I would say the church is speaking to the world, basically, and saying this is what we consider to be a just way of, looking at things. And it sees it sees poverty as a spiritual problem. And so it's speaking in spiritual terms, I think, to people, to take it out of the economy, we could look at it in terms of, Laudato Si, like the environment, like Pope Francis famously took what was primarily seen particularly as or especially as a scientific and political question, and said this is also a spiritual question. So I think that's how I would hear those comments, which that this is a spiritual question, and if people are poor, and Jesus said we have to ask why people are poor, then that's what the church is called to go. One of my favorite lines is from Dom Helder Câmara, who was the Archbishop of Recife in Brazil in the 1960s, and I love this, which is, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they're poor, they call me a communist, right? And so the church, so the church is basically saying, where is this coming from, and how can the church reflect on it, which is what they're trying to do with AI as well.
I think a lot of that's fair, but what you said earlier, I think, Ant and I take issue with cronyism. And it's easy to conflate it's easy for a lot of people apparently to conflate free markets with cronyism. Now, free markets have nothing to do with cronyism. As a matter of fact, they would reject it out of hand. That's something imposed upon free markets by the political class. And we have an issue with the political class, Antony, as a rule, right? Anybody who tells you with unimpeachable authority that you will do thusly, that's going to be a real problem. And yet it does seem like the church is speaking to the political class. That's the impression I walked away with overwhelmingly too.
Well, I think the key is this. The church is preaching the gospel. Okay, so the church is preaching the gospel and talking about caring for the poor. So Jesus says, when you care for the poor, you care for me. When you don't care for the poor, you don't care for me. Okay, that's one example. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Not blessed are the warmongers. So if Pope Leo were to go to a particular place and say, blessed are the peacemakers, people would say, oh, he's talking about politics. He's talking about the gospel. And if it has political implications, so be it. I think that's the idea. So he is not, Pope Leo, he's a mathematician. He's very bright, right? He is speaking, he doesn't want to get involved in politics per se, although the Vatican has, ambassadors and whatnot as a state. But what he's doing is preaching the gospel. And I think, again, to take it out of the realm of economics, to help people understand this idea, if he went into a war-torn country and said, blessed are the peacemakers, and people went nuts, look, that's the gospel. And I think we have to accept the fact that at times the gospel is not political, but it does have political implications, right? And that's, he has to say those things. If he went into a place, I'm just going to make something up. If he went into a place where there was no care for the poor, there was no care for the sick, there was no way of feeding hungry people, he would say something, because he'd say, we're called to feed people who are hungry. Now, if there was one political candidate who was running on that, people would say, oh, he's endorsing one over the other. No, he's speaking the gospel. So I think if he didn't talk about poverty or human dignity or peace, he wouldn't be doing his job. So that's the idea, that he's speaking spiritually, and sometimes that does have political implications. But the Vatican and local bishops should never say you should vote for this person or that person or this ticket or that ticket. They lay out Catholic teaching in the Gospels, and then they leave it up, and they should leave it up to the person's conscience. That's the idea.
There's a movement afoot on the American right now, and you can find it with J.D. Vance especially, but Marco Rubio as well, and a host of lesser lights. And the lesser lights tend to be, I'm just going to say it, white nationalists. And they talk about the common good in a way that right-leaning people rarely have over the years. And all of a sudden, I think we're left to ask the very difficult question, who gets to define the common good? Because I certainly don't want it to be these clowns. And I'm not including everybody on the right in that group, not by a long shot. But there is a group on the right who are quite horrible. And I think the right has a racism problem the same way the left has a communist problem. I don't blame the entirety of the group. It's just kind of a natural outgrowth of the belief system. But who gets to define the common good? And I know the Pope clearly has his own vision of what that might mean, as do you, as do I, and as does Ant. But politically, this has to be determined in order for it to be acted on.
Well, one of the insights, again, of Magnificat Humanitas is, and this is very clear in the document, that at least for AI, it can't just be a sort of elite cadre of people who get to decide. I mean, look, the question, for example, of data centers, which is very much in people's minds now. And who gets to decide that? Is that everybody, or just one person, or a select group of people? One of the great and most interesting insights of Catholic social teaching, which I find really interesting and not a lot of people know about, is a concept called subsidiarity. And it means that decisions are made best at the local level because people understand what's going on.
We talk about it a lot.
Yeah, so
lot.
I think it's a great idea. So I think certainly people who are affected should have a voice at the very least. And I think that's one of the great hallmarks of Catholic social teaching. So for example, if you're talking about indigenous peoples, who are, say, forced to, remove themselves from where they live for a data center, they should have a say about this. Do we leave? Do we stay? Are they consulted? Do they have a voice? I think that's a great sort of strength of Catholic social teaching, certainly in the modern age. But it just, that goes back to the question of human dignity, right? Does this person have the agency? Does this person have a voice? And I think that's part of having dignity as a human being. I think that's one of the things that Pope Leo is teaching. But again, I want to stress that what they're doing in all these documents is speaking from a spiritual point of view. I mean, the whole thing is really a meditation, and it begins with human dignity.
I think a lot of what one might perceive as difference of opinion actually falls under the heading of sins of omission versus sins of commission.
Mm-hmm.
Because you said, you start off by saying, okay, consider data centers, who decides? And my initial reaction was, well, of course, the person who owns the land decides whether he's going to sell it, and the data center decides whether they want to buy it. And I was perceiving what you were talking about to be a on one side or the other, the omission, commission of perhaps the government should step in and have something to say. And my response is absolutely not. However, you then went on to say, well, what about the people who are displaced? Now, that's an entirely different matter. That's, in James and I opinion, this is a proper role for government. These are people who are being, with no choice of their own, being negatively impacted. That's a violation of their rights, and it's a proper place for government to step in.
Well, you're right, and I think those are sometimes two competing cases. You have one where it is just it's just the market that decides. If whoever owns the land gets to sell it, and he gets a fair market value for the land. The end. That's how the invisible hand would say it. That's how Adam Smith would say it. Well, what does that do to the environment? And how does that affect the people who are there? And how does that affect the world? Let's assume that all the richest people in the world just sold, half the United States to data centers, and all the water was sucked up. Well, I mean, this is the point of Catholic social teaching. You can't just make decisions based on dollars and cents because it affects people. The question of climate change, as we know, disproportionately affects the poor. Now you can say, well, factories are, they can belch out as much smoke as they want if they pay, people, if they, go along the lines of this and, the end, right? But what happens to someone who's negatively affected by climate change? So this is this idea of foregrounding human dignity, not simply the profit motive. And I do agree with that, because there are other ways of taking measures of success of things or the value of things other than if it maximizes profit for a corporation, right? I mean, we've seen that time again. And again, I'm speaking as a capitalist, speaking as someone used to, I worked for General Electric for 6 years. So I know this world. And as we know, the role of the company is to, maximize its profit for its shareholders and stakeholders, right? But what Catholic social teaching is saying is that there are other metrics, and one of the other metrics is the common good. How does it affect the community?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I think again where my knee-jerk reaction is when someone says, "Well, the problem is profit," my response is it might be, but not yet. The problem that I hear you identifying is not one of profit, it's one of externalities, that someone's rights have been violated. When you pollute the environment, you're violating somebody's rights. That's not to say that I'm going to go 100% that profit is good all the time, but I am going to say that the problem that we've identified so far isn't yet at the problem of profit. It's at the problem of rights.
Yeah, I would say this, though. I would say, I'm not a political scientist or an economist, but I would say that rights language only goes so far, because rights language is, have you been trespassed upon? Has anything been done to you? Versus, does this lead to an environment where people can flourish? That's a difference. It's not simply, have my rights been violated, but can I live in a way that is befitting human dignity? And can I flourish? Can I become the person I'm meant to become? And can my family live, in a way that I can feel that I've sort of fulfilled myself? Now that can't be for everybody, but that's the other difference. It's pushing beyond rights language into human flourishing, which comes from Aquinas.
Let me ask you a very pointed question
Sure.
from the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Moore made his bones with a movie called Roger and Me, which I used to assign to all my classes, and at the end they would say, "Oh, the injustice that was perpetuated upon Flint, Michigan," and I would say, "Well, maybe, but should General Motors have been forced to stay open when they clearly couldn't make a profit, right? There were clearly better options for them as a corporation." And I'm willing to admit that horrible things happened to the people in and around Flint, Michigan. It was dreadful. Human flourishing was no longer possible as a result of this. But I'm not sure I would ever, under any circumstances, be willing to tell General Motors that they must keep a plant open.
Well, I think you're right. And I mean, again, speaking as a Wharton grad, right? I mean, sometimes they just can't afford to keep the plant open. But the question that the church poses and the question that the gospel poses is something like, is it necessary for the CEO to make 300 times as much as the lowest person on the assembly line? And by the way, I worked in a factory myself for a summer, right? So I know what that's like a little bit. Now you might say, well, and what I learned at Wharton was, well, if the company wants to pay that guy 300 times as much in order for the company to retain that person, right, the CEO or the COO, then it makes sense. Then it is a just salary. Now, it is a just salary according to economics, but is it just in terms of just morality? Does it make sense morally for someone to have that much money when people are poor and when the employees are not paid? And, could that person actually earn less money and, make the company less of a polluter? I mean, so those are the kind of questions we have to ask, I think. So the church doesn't say GM has to keep this factory open. The church asks, what is not only legal and economically feasible, but what is moral? I mean, I'm sure you would both agree. If you had a guy who, it's the parable of the rich man and the poor man in the Gospels. If you had a guy who was a trillionaire and who lived outside of a homeless shelter and never gave a cent to those people. Now, is that legal? Absolutely. Is it economic? Sure. He made what. Is it moral? No. So that's the difference. We have to look at not just what's legal and what makes sense in terms of economics, but what is moral. And that's just a different calculus. And that's what the church is trying to invite people to at least consider.
Well, people often accuse Elon Musk of just this, right? That he's the world's richest man, depending on which day you look at the figures and where his stocks are at. But he doesn't give to charity. Now, I've always believed that charity should be a private matter. Maybe Elon does too. Maybe he's giving to charity all the time.
Yeah, we
just don't know.
Right.
So, okay, maybe. But what is he doing with his tremendous wealth? He's making internet access possible globally, even for the North Koreans. What a gift to humanity that is. He's looking to figure out a way to get us to the moon and to Mars for colonizing purposes. What a gift to humanity that might end up being. So there's, I think, more than one way to look at the accumulation of wealth. Scrooge McDuck dancing around in his pile of gold and the so-called hoarding behavior, which doesn't exist in the real world. If it did, I think would be very blameworthy.
Well, the question is someone who's a trillionaire not in fact hoarding?
Not if he's putting lots of people to work and engaged in lots of different projects to make humanity better off.
Well,
et cetera, et cetera.
The question is how much? How much do you need? And that's the moral question. One of the great lines from, I think it's St. Francis de Sales, the coat that you're not using in your closet does not belong to you, it belongs to the poor. I mean, what is a just and moral distribution of wealth look like, really? And here's the thing. This is not me. This is Jesus. I mean, there's the parable about the man who says, I have so much grain. What am I going to do? This is Jesus's parable, not mine. What am I going to do? I will build bigger and bigger barns to hold the grain. And Jesus says in that parable, you fool, tonight your life will be, required of you. And what are you going to answer for God? What did you do with all that stuff? So again, this is not me. This is the Gospels. And I think once again, the Gospels sometimes have political implications and economic implications. And I think the key is, once again, to see that when the Pope is doing this or when church leaders are doing this, they're not doing it because, they're Republican or Democrat, whatever. This is the gospel and we got to listen to it.
Jim, I'm not going to go toe-to-toe with you on the Gospels or Jesus, but I have but one thing that I would like to draw out and get your opinion on. Jesus said, the poor will always be among you.
Mm-hmm.
And that word always does a lot of lifting in that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that it's an inevitability, even from Jesus' own mouth, that there will be poor people.
But he's not saying I want people to be poor. What he is saying
is... I understand
it's
that.
It's said to, the context, right? The context is Judas says, why did this person waste all this money on you, anointing your feet? And he said, the poor will always be with you. I mean, he's saying it to Judas, basically, who's kind of critiquing someone for spending money on Jesus. And, Jesus spends most of his time with the poor and says, I was poor and you did nothing for me. The key text there is Matthew 25, where he says, I was poor, I was hungry, I was sick, I was a stranger, I was in jail, and you didn't visit me. You didn't care for me. You didn't take care of me. You didn't clothe me. You didn't feed me. And the disciples say, well, when did that ever happen? He said, well, if you didn't do it to the least of my brothers and sisters, you didn't do it to me. So I think that's a much more kind of apropos understanding of how Jesus views poverty. It's hard.
I just want to get you to the point where Jesus seems to be saying that poverty is an inevitability.
Well, so is sickness, but he's not saying we shouldn't take care of sick people. He's saying,
No, I
yeah, yeah,
agree.
No,
and
I agree.
yeah,
He is, because he lived in the real world too. I totally agree. He is saying that.
yeah,
But he's not.
the
But
one
he's not
thing,
saying. I think, unfortunately, I just want to, for a second. He's not saying, therefore, don't do anything about it. I think that's how it's used, and like, oh, whatever. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I think that's how it's misinterpreted. Like, well, what's the
it,
point? Jesus said
it,
there'll always be poor people. Yeah,
it's absolutely not what I'm saying, and
I
I do
agree.
think it's incumbent upon us to help literally anywhere we can,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be with money, with time, with a kind word. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ways that you can make a real difference.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm just going to leave it at that. I think.
Well,
that's
let
for the best.
me jump in
Go ahead,
because I have the next sentence, which is I'm with you on everything you've said. The problem in my mind is when someone hears this and says, "Oh, the Catholic Church is calling for a law capping salaries," and that bothers me because I see that the implications of that law would be to actually exacerbate poverty, not to cure it. And so I remind people that when Jesus says care for the poor, he's talking to you. He's not prescribing a law. He's prescribing how you should behave, how each one of us should behave.
I think yes and no. I think he is talking to individuals, but I think he's also talking to communities. That Matthew 25 thing I just quoted, right? I'm sure you know it, when you care for the least of my brothers and sisters. That passage in the Gospels is called the judgment against the nations, not the judgment against individuals, but this is Jesus judging the peoples and the community. This is God judging the communities. I think you're right. I think the best way to say it is this, and I think we would agree on this. The church is called to form consciences, as Pope Francis said, not replace them. The church is not saying you must make this law or you must vote for this person. But the church is saying we're going to help you think about this such that when you do vote and when you do make laws, you have this in mind. That's the point. The church is never saying you must pass this bill, you must pass that bill. And certainly, and thank God, it doesn't get involved directly into economics in that way because, as you know very well, the sort of it's so fluid, right? And the church has plenty of economists, on its staff, but Pope Leo is not an economist. But the church is saying these are important issues to consider when decision makers and legislators are deciding. That's the idea. And so this church has to form these consciences. But I do think, I will say this, I'll push back a little bit. I think, maybe I'm not pushing back at you, and maybe you're not implying this. It is not accurate to say that this is just an individual matter. Because really, communities have to decide these things, right? There's some things I can't do. I can't go out and change education policy. I can vote for people, but a community can. A community can make it easier for a person who's poor to get an education or to get a head start, blah, 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 not the official public program. I can't do that. But the community is kind of responsible for that. So I think, again, it's a high bar. But again, get back to that Francis line of we are called to have our consciences formed, not replaced. I think that's really important. The church is not replacing a conscience.
And I think this is where the concept of subsidiarity becomes so important because
Mm-hmm.
so often when someone says something like, well, the community is responsible, so many in the United States, their thoughts go to Washington and a coast-to-coast law. That's not subsidiarity.
It is I would say, only at the level of the United States, right? It's subsidiarity.
Right.
But I think the more common thing is when people say, oh, it's only about giving out money to some homeless person. Jesus isn't asking us to do anything on a social level or on a community level. It's all individual. And that's what you see a lot on the right these days. You see, it's all charity. It's all about an individual thing. You don't have to think about it in terms of the company or the country. And we do, because this is how these laws are made. So to take an example, let's say you're a congressperson or a lawmaker or some sort of legislator, and these kinds of questions come up about data centers or about in the environment or about care for the poor. right? I mean, it's up to you to vote, based on your conscience, not to just say, oh, it's just, I give money to the poor. I don't have to think about this. That's the sort of lacuna I think that's missing in a lot of people's minds, this kind of connection. Yeah, it's very complicated. And I'm not an expert in Catholic social teaching, but I think it is important to say that these are all gospel questions that Jesus asks us. And we gotta, if they have political implications, we have to kind of ponder them. But once again, we are called to form consciences to help people make these decisions.
I want to bring us back to the idea of human dignity, because that really is quite central to everything that has come up in this conversation, and should be quite central to everything that comes up in every serious conversation. We started having a real problem with human dignity, and I don't mean to point to this as the fundamental problem or when it all started. Clearly, we had a Nazi problem once upon a time, right, that predates anything I'm going to talk about, and I'm aware of all that. But once we started dealing with each other electronically more than in person, once we defined community by our interests that we share with people strewn about the country, so I'm in many communities, right? I'm in the cigar smoker community. There's not a cigar smoker within a mile of my house in any direction. I know this because they all complain about the smell, and nobody asks to come over and have one. So as we kind of redefine community in this broad way, what we have found is that we've become much more vicious with each other. And there's a mean-spiritedness to public discourse now that you'd have to go back to 1800 to see the equivalent. And I wonder, under these circumstances, this seems to be the biggest threat or impediment to subsidiarity that we've got, is that people just don't perceive locality anymore the way they once did. And I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that.
I think that's very insightful. I've never heard it put quite that way, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's really profound.
I'm writing a book on this. Maybe I can make the New York Times bestseller too.
You've obviously thought about a lot. I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense, because in your sort of laying it out, you're absolutely right. Because we don't have a connection to people, right? We don't bump up against them. That's the other thing. That Robert Putnam book, Bowling Alone, that came out, years and years ago, that talked about kind of community groups and things like that. People are more atomized, and they have less of a sense of community because it's all this kind of narrow casting. Like, I only talk to Jesuit priests who are interested in Pope Leo's, and so it's very kind of narrow, versus kind of being in a larger community where you're bumping up against people who don't care about Magnificat Humanitas. They don't care about Pope Leo. They're not Catholic. They're not this. But I think the most interesting sort of result of what you're saying is that then it becomes easier to demonize people.
It does.
And then the idea of the common good, the heck with the other person. I don't care about the common good.
They're evil.
They're evil. They're evil.
Yeah.
And so why would I want to care about, freeloading, fill in the blanks, right? So I think that's really astute. And I think that social media both diminishes our community, absolutely, but it also, as you say, increases kind of hatred, especially when it's easy to be anonymous online. So you're right. And I think this is one of the reasons why, again, to bring it back to Magnificat Humanitas, he's kind of raising an alarm, about saying that everything, is not virtual. I mean, even Pope Francis talked about this, and you have to have what Francis called, which I think is very beautiful, the culture of encounter, actually physically being with people. And sometimes he would say, when you give money to the homeless or to the poor, to the sick, are you actually, which I thought was really kind of beautiful, are you actually touching them, like physically? Are you handing it to them? Are you, visiting someone in the hospital? Because you're right, it becomes much easier to make someone the other. And as you say, quite rightly, evil. And there goes the whole idea of the common good, because I don't give a damn about the other people.
You'll be amused to know that one of the chapters in said book is Scrolling Alone.
Oh, that's a great title. That should be the title of your book. That is a great title. What, do you have a title for the book yet? Scrolling
I
along.
do. It's called The Tragedy of the Culture.
Well, that's pretty broad. Yeah, yeah, I like that. But scrolling along, that is fantastic. Robert Putnam would be very happy. Yeah, so I
I
think
hope
we're
so.
on
Yeah,
we're on the
hope you
same
would be.
page about that. Yeah, that's great.
Well,
I also have
we're-
another chapter owing to Grace Jones called "Slave to the Algorithm."
That's
She had
funny.
a
I remember Slave to the
fantastic album
Rhythm.
called "Slave to the
I
Rhythm." Yeah.
remember. I'm about that age, right?
we're running up on 45 minutes now. Do you want to take a moment to plug? Do you have a website? I know you have a book that you want to talk about.
I would. Well, thank you very much. This has really been a wonderful conversation, so lively. My new book is called, since we've been talking about capitalism, it's called Work in Progress. And the subtitle is Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest. And
You should hold it up.
I will
You've
hold
got
it
a
up.
copy.
And
Yeah.
our conversation has been, quite serious. This book is pretty lighthearted. It's the story of finding work in a variety of crazy summer jobs, some of them listed on the cover, some of them not, and then eventually finding God. I also talk, if people are interested, I do talk about, briefly my time at Wharton and at GE as well, and some of the lessons I learned. But Work in Progress, lighthearted memoir about some crazy summer jobs in the 1970s.
That's
That
great.
sounds
You
like
can find it, as they say, wherever good books are sold. It's in print, audio, and ebook.
Superb.
Outstanding.
Father Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. And I
And-
have to say, I'm not used to talking as a former Wharton grad, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. And thanks for being
As-
so lively.
As the local heathen in this conversation, I would like to say without reservation that you would be welcome back here any day of the week.
Thank you very much.
Love to talk to you again.
My pleasure. Thanks very much. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.